The envelope was white, unremarkable. Standard paper, nothing elegant about it. But when Donna Summer's trembling fingers pulled out the single sheet inside, Backstage at Madison Square Garden in 1984, she read 3 words that would echo through the remaining 28 years of her life. You killed us. The world knew her as the Queen of Disco, the woman whose voice had defined an entire era of liberation, joy, and uninhibited celebration. But behind the sequined gowns and the pulsing synthesizers, behind the sold-out arenas and the platinum records stacking up like promises of immortality, Donna Summer was carrying a weight that no amount of applause could lift. And that letter, sliding into her hands between costume changes, between the roar of 20,000 fans and the silence of her dressing room, represented something far more devastating than any critic's review or any chart position could ever convey. It represented a community's sense of betrayal. It represented lives slipping away in hospital rooms. It represented the AIDS crisis at its most terrifying peak, and it represented the belief that she had turned her back on the very people who had lifted her to the stars. Before we continue with this story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. We bring you the untold stories, the hidden truths, and the real human moments behind the legends you thought you knew. But to understand why that letter carried such devastating power, you have to go back. Back to when LaDonna Adrienne Gaines was born on December 31st, 1948, in Boston's Dorchester neighborhood, the third of 7 children in a deeply religious family where gospel music filled the rooms and church was the center of existence. Back to when a young girl with an extraordinary voice sang in the church choir, believing that her gift was meant for praising God and nothing else. Back to when that same girl, barely 18, auditioned for a European production of the musical Hair and found herself in Munich, Germany, far from everything she knew, stepping into a world that would reshape her identity completely. Munich in the late 1960s and early 1970s was a city of transformation, experimentation, and artistic revolution. The conservative post-war Germany was giving way to something more daring, more questioning, more willing to push boundaries. And in this environment, LaDonna Gaines, now calling herself Donna Summer after a brief marriage, found herself working in musical theater, lending her powerful voice to productions, and gradually being drawn into the orbit of a man who would change music history. Giorgio Moroder. Giorgio Moroder was an Italian producer and songwriter who was pioneering something entirely new in music. He was experimenting with synthesizers, with electronic sounds, with the possibilities of technology to create music that felt futuristic, hypnotic, and intensely physical. He was searching for a voice that could embody this new sound, a voice that could be sensual and powerful and raw all at once. And when he heard Donna Summer sing, he knew he had found it. The year was 1975. Moroder had a concept, a vision for a song that would be unlike anything on the radio. He wanted to create an extended track, something that would capture the feeling of physical intimacy, of building desire, of climax and release. He wanted a song that would be played in nightclubs, where the dance floor was a place of liberation and expression and connection. And he wanted Donna Summer to perform it. When Moroder explained the concept to her, Donna initially recoiled. This was a woman who had been raised singing hymns, who believed deeply in her Christian faith, who saw her voice as a gift from God. The idea of making sounds that simulated sexual pleasure, of turning her voice into an instrument of explicit sensuality, went against everything she had been taught about dignity, about morality, about what a woman should or should not do. She told Moroder she couldn't do it. She told him it was wrong She told him it would destroy her. But Moroder persisted. He explained his artistic vision. He talked about the liberation of disco, about the freedom that music could provide, about how this wasn't exploitation but expression. And gradually, reluctantly, Donna agreed to try. Just once. Just to see what would happen. The recording session took place in Moroder's Munich studio, a space filled with electronic equipment that looked like something from a science fiction film. Synthesizers, drum machines, sequencers creating sounds that had never existed in music before. Donna stood at the microphone, and Moroder told her to close her eyes, to let go of her inhibitions, to surrender to the feeling he was trying to create. And then, for 17 minutes, Donna Summer made sounds that would become legendary, controversial, and career-defining. Love to Love You Baby was released as a single, though radio stations initially refused to play it. The sexual nature of the vocal performance was too explicit, too provocative for mainstream broadcast. The BBC banned it outright. Conservative groups called it obscene. Religious organizations condemned it. But in the nightclubs, particularly in the gay clubs of New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and other major cities, the song became an anthem. It became the sound of liberation, of living freely, of expressing desire without shame or apology. The gay community in the mid-1970s was experiencing its own revolution. The Stonewall riots of 1969 had marked a turning point, a moment when LGBTQ individuals began openly demanding their rights, their visibility, their place in society. Disco music became deeply intertwined with this movement. The dance floor was a space of acceptance, where gay men and lesbians could be themselves without fear, where the music created a sense of community and belonging. And Donna Summer, with her powerful voice and her willingness to push boundaries, became an icon to this community. Love to Love You Baby reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. It sold over 1 million copies. It launched Donna Summer into international stardom. And it created what she would later describe as a monster, a persona that she couldn't control, a public image that had nothing to do with who she really was. Because while the world saw the sex goddess on stage, in sequined gowns cut to reveal, moving sensuously under spotlights, making those famous sounds that had shocked the mainstream and thrilled the underground, backstage Donna Summer was on her knees praying. She was reading her Bible. She was asking God for forgiveness. She was trying to reconcile the woman she had been raised to be with the woman she was being paid to perform as. And the tension was tearing her apart. Throughout the late 1970s, Donna Summer released hit after hit. I Feel Love, with its entirely electronic production, was revolutionary, essentially creating the template for modern electronic dance music. Last Dance won her an Academy Award for Best Original Song. Hot Stuff crossed over into rock territory, showing her versatility. Bad Girls addressed social issues while still being a massive dance floor hit. She was selling millions of records. She was selling out arenas. She was one of the biggest stars in the world. And the gay community loved her. They saw her as their champion, their voice, their icon. They filled the dance floors when her songs played. They bought her albums in massive numbers. They came to her concerts in droves. They saw in her someone who represented freedom, expression, and the courage to be exactly who you were without apology. But then came 1983. The AIDS epidemic was beginning to devastate the gay community. What had started as mysterious reports of unusual illnesses was now recognized as a deadly virus that was spreading primarily through sexual contact and intravenous drug use. The gay community was being hit hardest. Men were getting sick, wasting away, dying, and the medical establishment seemed slow to respond. The government seemed indifferent. Society seemed more interested in moral judgment than in compassion or research. Fear was everywhere. People were dying, and nobody seemed to care. And in this climate of terror and grief and desperation, a rumor began to spread. The rumor claimed that Donna Summer had made a statement during a concert. The exact wording varied depending on who was telling the story, but the essence was always the same. Donna Summer had said that AIDS was God's punishment for homosexuality, that gay people were getting what they deserved, that the disease was divine judgment. The most repeated version of the story claimed that she had said, "God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve," followed by comments suggesting that AIDS was a form of holy retribution. The impact was immediate and devastating. Gay organizations called for boycotts of her music. Protesters appeared outside her concerts. Record stores in gay neighborhoods removed her albums from their shelves. The very community that had lifted her to stardom now felt utterly betrayed. How could their icon, their champion, turn against them in their darkest hour? How could the woman who had sung about liberation and freedom now condemn them to death? Donna Summer vehemently denied ever making such statements. She issued public denials. She said she had been misquoted, that the rumors were false, that she would never say such terrible things. She expressed support for people with AIDS. She said she loved and respected her gay fans. But the denials seemed inadequate, too late, insufficient to counter the damage that had been done. Some people believed her. Some people thought the whole thing was a misunderstanding, a rumor that had spiraled out of control. But many didn't. Many believed that where there was smoke, there was fire. Many believed that her religious beliefs, which she had never hidden, made such statements entirely plausible. And the boycott continued. This is where the letter enters the story. It was 1984, roughly a year after the controversy had erupted. Donna Summer was performing at Madison Square Garden in New York, one of the most iconic venues in the world. The tour had been difficult. Attendance was down. Protesters sometimes appeared outside venues. The media was asking questions about the controversy at every press opportunity. But she kept performing, kept trying to move forward, kept insisting that the rumors weren't true. During the concert, between songs, a man in the audience approached the stage. Security moved to intercept him, but he held up his hands, showing he wasn't a threat. He was thin, visibly unwell, moving with the careful slowness of someone whose body was betraying him. He had an envelope in his hand, and he called out, asking if someone could give it to Donna. One of the stage crew, perhaps out of sympathy, perhaps out of curiosity, took the envelope and promised to deliver it. Backstage, during a costume change, the envelope was handed to Donna. She was in the organized chaos of a concert in progress. Dancers and technicians and assistants moving around her. Music thumping through the walls. Her next outfit being prepared. She opened the envelope absently, expecting perhaps a fan letter, perhaps a request for an autograph. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in shaky script, as if the person writing had struggled to hold the pen steady. And at the top, in larger letters that had been traced over multiple times for emphasis, were 3 words: "You killed us." Donna stopped moving. Everything around her continued, the bustling activity of a show in progress, but she stood frozen, staring at those 3 words. The letter continued. It was short, just a few paragraphs, but every word hit like a physical blow. The writer identified himself as someone who had been a devoted fan, who had bought every album, who had danced to her music in the clubs where he had felt free and accepted and alive, who had believed that she understood what it meant to be different, to be judged, to be fighting for the right to exist authentically. And then he wrote about getting sick, about the diagnosis, about the fear, about watching friends die, about the terror of being abandoned not just by society, but by one of the people he had believed was on his side. "You killed us," he wrote again at the end. "Not with a weapon, not with your hands, but with your words. You told the world we deserved this. You told the world God wanted us dead. And now we are dying, and part of the reason is because people like you made it acceptable to hate us, to ignore us, to let us suffer." The letter wasn't signed. There was no return address. Just those words, written by someone who was clearly dying, who had used what energy he had left to come to her concert and deliver this message. Donna Summer's hands were shaking as she finished reading. A stage assistant was calling her name, telling her she had 2 minutes before she needed to be back on stage. She folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bag. And then she went back out under the lights and performed the rest of the concert. But something had changed. Over the following weeks and months, more letters arrived. They came to her management office, to her record label, sometimes to venues where she was scheduled to perform. Not all of them were as direct as that first one, but they all carried the same message: betrayal, hurt, anger, grief. Some were heartbreaking in their vulnerability, describing hospital rooms and memorial services and the sense of being abandoned by everyone. Some were furious, cursing her, condemning her, telling her she would be judged by history as harshly as she had supposedly judged them. Some were desperate, pleading for her to say something, to do something, to acknowledge the suffering that was happening. Donna kept them, every single one. She didn't know why at first. Perhaps it was guilt. Perhaps it was a form of penance. Perhaps it was because, despite her denials, some part of her wondered if she had said something that could have been interpreted the way the rumors suggested. She had been raised in a conservative religious tradition. She did believe in the Bible. She had struggled for years with the tension between her faith and her career, between the woman who prayed and the woman who performed. Had something slipped out in an interview, in a casual conversation that had been overheard, in a moment of frustration or fear? She couldn't remember. But the letters kept arriving, and she kept them all in a box that she carried with her from hotel to hotel, city to city, year to year. The boycott eventually faded, not because there was any resolution, not because the controversy was ever fully addressed, but because time moves on and attention shifts. By the late 1980s, Donna Summer's career had evolved. She had moved away from disco into more mainstream pop and rock. She had won a Grammy for Hot Stuff, becoming the first black female artist to win in the rock category, proving her versatility and talent beyond any single genre. She had continued to have hits, though never quite reaching the overwhelming dominance of her mid-70s peak. But the relationship with the gay community was forever changed. Some forgave her, believing her denials, choosing to focus on the music rather than the controversy. Others never did, maintaining that her words, whether she admitted them or not, had done real harm during a time when the community desperately needed allies, not enemies. And Donna herself remained caught between two worlds. She never stopped being religious. She never stopped reading her Bible, praying, attending church when she could. She raised her daughters in the faith, teaching them the same values she had been taught. But she also never forgot those letters. She never forgot the faces she had seen at protests outside her concerts, thin men holding signs, some so weak they could barely stand, but determined to make their voices heard. In interviews in later years, when asked about the controversy, Donna would express sadness and frustration. She would maintain that she had been misquoted, that she had never wished harm on anyone, that she had only ever wanted to make music that brought people joy. She would say that the whole situation had been one of the most painful experiences of her career. But she never went into detail about the letters. She never talked about the box she carried. She never explained exactly what had happened in those moments when the controversy was at its peak. Some people close to her said that the letters haunted her, that she would sometimes take them out and read them, particularly when she was alone in hotel rooms on tour, when the applause had faded, and she was left with only her thoughts. That she saw them as a reminder of the power words have, true or false, to wound and to change the course of lives. The AIDS epidemic continued to devastate through the 1980s and into the 1990s. Treatments eventually emerged. Prevention education improved. The terror of those early years slowly gave way to hope and then to management of the disease as a chronic condition rather than an immediate death sentence. But an entire generation had been decimated. The gay community lost artists, activists, ordinary people whose contributions to the world would never be known because they died before they could make them. And throughout this period, Donna Summer kept performing. She kept recording. She kept trying to navigate the complicated landscape of being a woman of faith in an industry that often celebrated excess and hedonism, of being a black woman in a genre that had been pioneered by Black and Latino artists, but was increasingly dominated by white performers, of being a mother who wanted to protect her children while being a public figure whose image was built on sensuality and provocation. Then came September 11th, 2001. Donna Summer was in New York that day when the towers fell. She was among the thousands who breathed in the toxic dust that filled the air, the pulverized concrete and asbestos and chemicals that would later be linked to numerous health problems. In the aftermath, she became increasingly concerned about air quality, about toxins, about invisible dangers. She covered her home in silk curtains, believing they would filter the air. She wore masks long before the COVID pandemic made them common. People who knew her said she had become almost paranoid about contamination, about breathing, about the vulnerability of the body. Looking back, some wondered if there was a connection to those letters, to the memory of a disease that had killed through the simple act of viral transmission, something invisible and unstoppable. Whether the trauma of AIDS, even experienced secondhand through the letters and the protests and the grief of an entire community, had left its mark on her psyche in ways that manifested years later in a different fear of different invisible threats. In 2012, Donna Summer was diagnosed with lung cancer. She had never smoked. She had lived a relatively healthy lifestyle. The diagnosis seemed to come from nowhere, though some speculated it was related to the toxic exposure from 9/11. She fought the disease privately, not wanting public attention, not wanting sympathy, just wanting to spend time with her family, to paint, which had become her therapeutic outlet, and to make peace with whatever time she had left. On May 17, 2012, Donna Summer died at her home in Naples, Florida. She was 63 years old. The news spread quickly. Tributes poured in from around the world. The music industry mourned the loss of one of its most distinctive voices. Radio stations played her greatest hits. Younger generations who had only known her music secondhand discovered her catalog and marveled at how much of modern music had been influenced by her work. And in the gay community, the response was complicated. Because even after all those years, even after her death, The controversy from 1983 remained unresolved. Some people chose to remember the joy her music had brought, the liberation they had felt dancing to I Feel Love or Last Dance or Hot Stuff. Others couldn't separate the art from the artist, couldn't forget the feeling of betrayal, whether justified or not. That had marked a turning point in their relationship with someone they had considered an icon. In the days after her death, journalists and biographers began researching her life more deeply, trying to get a complete picture of who Donna Summer had been beyond the stage persona. And some discovered, through interviews with people who had known her, about the letters, about the box she had kept for nearly 30 years, about how she would read them sometimes, in quiet moments, as if trying to understand something, as if trying to find an answer to a question she could never quite articulate. Her family found the box when going through her belongings. Hundreds of letters, some yellowed with age, some more recent, all carrying the same themes of pain, betrayal, grief, anger, and sometimes, in the later ones, a grudging respect, or even forgiveness. The family was reportedly shocked. They hadn't known about the letters. Donna had never mentioned them, had kept this private burden entirely to herself. The question of what to do with them became a matter of debate. Some family members felt they should be destroyed, that they represented a painful chapter that didn't need to be preserved. Others felt they should be archived, that they were an important historical record of a specific moment in time, of the AIDS crisis, of the complicated relationship between artists and their audiences, of the power of words and rumors to shape reality. In the end, the letters were placed in private storage. They were not made public. They were not donated to any archive or museum. They remain, as far as is known, sealed away, a silent testament to one of the most painful episodes in Donna Summer's life and career. But the story of those letters raises questions that extend far beyond one artist and one controversy. Questions about responsibility and truth in the age of rumors. Questions about how communities form attachments to public figures and what happens when those attachments are threatened. Questions about the intersection of art and morality, of faith and expression, of public persona and private belief. Donna Summer spent her entire career trying to reconcile contradictions. The church girl and the disco queen, the mother reading Bible stories and the performer making sexual sounds into a microphone. The woman who believed in God and the woman who became an icon to a community that mainstream religion often condemned. And perhaps the letters represented the impossibility of that reconciliation. The recognition that sometimes you cannot be everything to everyone. That sometimes the contradictions are too fundamental to resolve. In the decades since her death, Love to Love You Baby has been recognized as a groundbreaking piece of music history. It's been sampled, covered, analyzed, and celebrated. The song that once scandalized mainstream America is now taught in music schools as an example of innovative production and fearless artistic expression. The controversy over the AIDS comments has faded for many people, overshadowed by the music itself and by the broader recognition of her contributions to popular culture. But for those who were there, who lived through the AIDS crisis, who felt the sting of what they believed was betrayal from someone they had loved and supported, the memory remains sharp. And for Donna Summer herself, if those letters are any indication, the memory remained sharp as well. She carried them for nearly 30 years. She never threw them away. She never publicly acknowledged them. But she kept them close. Kept them as a reminder of something that perhaps she spent her entire life trying to understand. The man who handed that first letter to the stage crew at Madison Square Garden in 1984 is long dead now. almost certainly a casualty of the epidemic that was raging through the gay community. His name is unknown. His story is unknown. Whether he lived days or months or years after writing those words, nobody knows. But his message, "You killed us," became part of Donna Summer's story, part of her legacy, part of the complicated truth of who she was and what her life meant. And in the end, perhaps that's the real lesson of this story. That public figures are not just the personas they present on stage or in interviews. They are human beings carrying private burdens, wrestling with contradictions, trying to navigate impossible situations where there are no good answers. That the relationship between artists and audiences is more complex than simple devotion or rejection. That words, whether spoken or rumored, have power to heal and to harm, and that sometimes the most important parts of a person's life are the ones they never talk about publicly, the boxes they keep hidden, the letters they read alone in hotel rooms when the crowds have gone home and the only witness is their own conscience. Donna Summer was the queen of disco. She was a 5-time Grammy winner. She was a revolutionary who changed the sound of popular music. She was a devoted Christian who struggled with the tension between faith and career. She was a mother who wanted to protect her children from the realities of her public image. She was a woman who kept a box of letters for 30 years, letters that accused her of betrayal, letters that represented one of the deepest wounds of her professional life. And when Last Dance plays now, in clubs or at weddings or on oldies stations, when that powerful voice soars and the rhythm pulses and people move together in celebration, perhaps it's worth remembering the whole story. The joy and the pain, the triumph and the controversy, the public persona and the private burden, the queen of disco who carried the weight of a community's grief and never quite figured out how to set it down. That's the untold story of Donna Summer and the letters that haunted her. A story about the price of fame, the power of rumors, the complexity of identity, and the impossible task of being everything to everyone while trying to remain true to yourself. A story that ended with her death in 2012 but continues to resonate in the questions it raises about art, faith, community, and the human cost of living in the public eye. The letters remain in storage somewhere, sealed away, silent. But their impact, like Donna Summer's music, continues to echo through time.